Welcome to Grace Between the Lines, where scripture, stories, and inspirations of grace encourage us to look with fresh eyes between the lines of life and at our everyday experiences to realize God's presence there. We welcome you to this circle of grace that surrounds each moment of life, as we really do live in the company of grace. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. So Peter Bowmer, pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church in downtown Toledo. And how many years have you been with us now?
I've been with you just over 7 years now. We immigrated in January 16, I believe it was, 2014, in that great year of snow in Northwest Ohio. I think we had the record of 84 inches. I remember arriving here and some good friends, i.e. the Kriegers, put us up in their basement for a couple of months, picked us up from Detroit Airport about 8 p.m. at night. It was cold, it was snowy and windy, and we had had a very long flight from Australia, and it didn't go according to plan. We had organised for good layover here and there so we could get to Los Angeles and then get changed out of our summer clothes because it was very hot in Australia at that time of the year. And the flight was delayed, so our connection was very close. We actually almost missed the connection. We had to run from one terminal to the next. 4 kids in tow, 2 50-pound bags each in tow. We got to the gate, we got to the terminal, and the person behind the desk said, "Well, you're too late, they're just about to close the doors." I said, "We're going to run." We had one kid in tears, another kid having an asthma attack. It was just a very stressful moment. So we didn't get changed out of our summer clothes into the winter clothes. So when we finally got to Detroit, 8 o'clock at night, I think I was still in a tank top and shorts.
You were in shorts, yep.
Sandals, yep. So welcome to Northwest Ohio in January.
Hello, you're here. And I remember Tanea just opened her suitcase and put clothes on. It was like right there in the middle of the aisle. It's like, I don't care. It's cold.
And the thing was, we only had those 2 suitcases each, and we had packed, I think, about 50 cardboard cartons worth of clothing and personal items and whatnot, and they were supposed to arrive within a week or two. It was at least 4 months before those cartons arrived. So we were living out of those suitcases, and there's nothing you can buy in Australia warmth-wise to make you suitable for the cold here in Toledo.
I still remember the picture I have with the snow coming down and you standing in front of the snow drifts. That it was cold. It was a lot of snow that when you
yeah, good fun.
Those are good memories. Good memories. So you did come to the United States, and we are so very grateful. But before we get to that story more, let's talk about this thing called grace. So when you hear the word grace, what is it that you think of?
I automatically go back to my confirmation lessons or Sunday school lessons.
Oh, okay.
Grace is God's riches at Christ's expense.
God's riches
at Christ's expense.
Christ's expense.
GRACE, yeah. That's a really easy way to remember it. For me, the definition of grace is, in the secular world, grace is beauty, gentleness, elegance. You think of Princess Grace, or you think of Audrey Hepburn or someone like that. A graceful person. And in a way, to me, that's what God is. God is this elegance in our lives, not something we deserve. It's oftentimes unexpected, but a beauty of, not a physical beauty, but a beauty of relationship, a beauty of passion, a beauty of love that just enters into our lives like you say, sometimes in the darkest moments, sometimes in the lightest moments, but just God's elegant presence with us always.
Always. Yeah, that's beautiful. So who did you learn that grace from?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's one of those, I guess it's one of those things that I'm at that time of my life now where I'm starting to think I'm getting older, and I wish I could start over again knowing what I know now, you know, because it's, how do we know these things? It's a cumulative thing, you know, it's knowledge and experience and emotion and spirituality that we just gather and sift and grow together in a very organic sort of way. Probably started with my mother. My mother was Lutheran, and she was a model. She was very graceful in her younger days, and she always had a very low self-esteem, even though she was very talented and very intelligent and beautiful. And so she always doubted herself and always, I guess, put herself down. But as a result, I think she thought it was very important that all people should feel welcome and feel included, no matter who they are. I remember when I was at high school, I went to an all-boys state school in Australia, and it's now co-ed, thank God. But back in the day, the girls' school was directly across the road, so we had some limited contact with women in our lives. But for us boys, as we got a bit older, and we started going to the pub on a Wednesday night, probably when we were about 17. I'm sure it was before school finished. The legal age in Australia is 18.
I was going to say, and that's before the legal age, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, it was before the legal age, and the pub owner, he made us sit out the back. There was a courtyard in the back, the beer garden, what's called, and he made us sit out there on a Wednesday night, and he used to call us the Milky Bar kids, you know. Just a crazy name.
Okay.
So we'd get there every Wednesday night and have a few beers, and it continued after we finished school and when we started employment. And I didn't always feel like going to the pub on a Wednesday night, but my mother would always say, "You need to go, Peter, because how are your friends going to know about Jesus unless you're there?" And it's not like we talked about Jesus or anything like that, you know. It's like, I'm not talking about Jesus. And they said, no. She said, no, but they know that you're a Jesus person. And if you keep up a relationship with them, then if ever the need arises, they know who to turn to. And I'm still friends with those gentlemen 40 years later. Unbelievable, 40 years. And on Facebook, you know, they describe me as their spiritual guru after all these years. When I decided to be a pastor all those years ago, most of the church people I knew thought it was a really bad mistake. But my non-religious friends thought it was the best thing. They said, you know, if Christians were more like you, we'd all go to church. That sprang from the grace of my mother, making sure that all people were included and a down-to-earth, everyday faith.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So as you tell that story, I mean, it just gives me goosebumps. That's so cool. So you were doing fresh expressions at the very beginning of your life and ministry. And your mother
I kind of laugh about it a little bit, yeah.
That is so cool. So you really were raised in the company of grace.
Yes. I guess as far as the pub experience and fresh expressions, I remember one year, one of my best mate at the time, Ian, he had motorbikes, so that was pretty good fun. We decided to get our ears pierced, and we got them pierced on Christmas Eve, I remember, and then went to the pub after that. There was a piano in the pub, and back in those days, I could play the piano barely. So we went to the pub, and you can imagine all these old-timer barflies at this pub, and we started singing Christmas carols at the pub after just getting our ears pierced. You know, So yeah, fresh expressions.
I love it. I love it. So we know that, we all live through life experiences, and is there one in particular that you would like to share, particularly in relationship to this concept of living? I mean, you already shared a wonderful story. Is there another that you could share with us about being in the company of grace, or seeing, grace between the lines?
Well, can I share two?
You absolutely can.
Because this conversation just got my memories going.
Good.
So as influential as my mother was in forming this graceful faith in me, I'm not always sure that she got it herself. And so when she was 49 years old, she died from breast cancer, which had then spread to her liver. And that was the first person I ever knew who died. So I was 21 years old. It was a particularly tough time. And I guess I was there with her when she died. And I'd managed to phone my sisters, so they were home in time. But my dad wasn't, and my brother wasn't, even though she'd been dying for a couple of months, you know what I mean? Such a strong sense of denial in what was happening.
Wow, yeah.
And so I had to call my dad and say, you better come home. So he came home from work, because, that's the denial. Why would you even be at work? But that's the way it was. And so then, of course, my sisters were very upset, and me being the youngest and probably the, most connected with them all. So everyone's crying. I mean, the funeral went by, everyone's crying. It was a year before I cried.
Really?
And yeah. I was back at the seminary studying to be a pastor, and there must have been some party going on or something, and I was probably drinking a little bit too much. And I just remember I started crying, and I just could not stop. It was like all this grief, which I'd been holding back and supporting other people for the last year, all of a sudden was released. And it was in that moment, and that's the saddest moment I can ever remember in my life, just the depths of, when we talk about Sheol, in the Bible, we talk about going to the pit. And Sheol is described as a place beneath the water, being trapped in the seaweed in the darkness and not being able to get it. That's how I felt. I felt like I was in Sheol. But strangely, it's the closest I've ever felt to God as well. I felt God's presence in that darkness. And I think if I hadn't have felt that presence of God in that darkness, I'm not sure that I'd probably still be here today. And to me, that was an unexpected expression of grace. That God reached out and said, Peter, this is the darkest moment, and here I am. Yeah, I was not alone. So that was one moment of grace.
Absolutely.
And as I mentioned, at that time I was at the seminary training to be a pastor. I struggled at the seminary in Australia. There was, to this day, men only who are allowed to be pastors in Australia. So I went from an all-boys high school, started work for the government in the taxation department, and then ended up in an accountant's firm, which really did not suit me.
I can't see it.
I'm not a bean counter, although it's given me good knowledge since. And so then I went off to the seminary, which again was another all-male sort of place. Graduated from there, became a pastor, met my beautiful wife, had some good calls to go to, started having kids, ended up having 4 beautiful daughters. Amazing young women, all very different, all very independent. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to be part of their lives, seeing them grow up to become the wonderful people they are now. But along the way, I became more and more aware that I was serving in an institution that did not support my kids. I remember going to a pastor's conference one, again, all men, and the bishop then, the presiding bishop, attended our pastor's conference, and he said, "Men," I can still remember the exact words, "Men, I need you to get your sons to be pastors because we need more pastors." And of course, I put up my hand and said, "Well, what do you want me to do? I've got 4 daughters." And it was just general laughter, like, "Oh, Peter's making a funny joke." And I said it again, "No, I'm serious. What do you want me to do? I have 4 daughters." And at one stage, one of those daughters, and I don't know if you'll guess who it was, one of those daughters said, "I want to be a pastor like my dad." And it got me thinking, well, how can I continue to serve in an institution that discriminates against my own daughters? Sometimes you see people who feel comfortable throwing their own kids under the bus, but I don't. And so me and a group of people began to have some underground seminars on how we could encourage the adoption of women's ordination in the Lutheran Church of Australia. There were a number of votes at the general synods, at the conventions, national conventions of the church, and they typically lost by about 5 or 6 or 10 votes. You need a 2/3 majority.
So it was kind of like half and half.
You need a 2/3 majority.
2/3. Okay.
So the first one got 65%.
Gotcha.
And it continued and continued.
Interesting.
And in 2010, as a side story, my wife and kids, they'd never seen snow. Snow is not that common in Australia. We get some snow in places, but nowhere where we lived. And so we decided that we wanted to book a vacation to New Zealand because they've always got snow. But online, I found some very cheap flights to Los Angeles. So we ended up in Los Angeles instead and went on a 3-week RV trip from Los Angeles across to the Grand Canyon, up to Monument Valley and San Francisco and back down again.
You didn't find much snow though, did you?
We did. We found snow in the Grand Canyon. So that was great. And we had such a fun time, the kids were still small enough that we all fit in the RV okay. And, driving on the other side of the road and all those wonderful experiences, discovering Cinnabons and, all the good things. But we decided we'd come back again. I promised them we'd come back again, which we did in 2012. But by 2012, I was well and truly over. It was just soul destroying working in this church that continued to discriminate against women. Let's not even talk about the LGBT community, right? And so I got to the point, another dark place, where I decided I'm either going to have to get out of ministry altogether and pursue a career in education, because I'm also a teacher. My wife said, "You can't do that, because you're a pastor. That's who you are." And we were fortunate when we came over in 2012. I took all my sabbatical. I thought one way or another, I'm leaving, so I'm going to take all my sabbatical and get ready to start a new career. While we were over here, we spoke to, I caught up with you, and I caught up with a director of evangelical mission in the New York Synod, and started talking about, is it possible for me to come and be a pastor in the United States? I also spoke with a guy from, and I can't remember his name, we had a meeting in Pennsylvania somewhere, from the North American Lutheran Church.
Oh, wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah. And he was very keen for me to come over, because I hadn't really heard about who they were or what they were doing. I just knew they ordained women. And one thing led to another, so that by the time we got back to Australia from that sabbatical, my wife and I said, well, let's do it. Let's just sell everything and move over there. And fortunately, the wonders of Facebook, I got to reconnect with you and with Catherine Shibler and a few other people. And it came to pass that I was able to get a call and serve here in Toledo. I remember being impatient with the process.
No, oh, really? You remember that? That's interesting, because that's not how I remember it.
I was not patient at all. Why has it taken so long? It took like 2 months for this call process to eventuate. I remember back in Australia, outside my office in Australia, the leaves were falling. It was, I just have a visual of being under this tree, kicking the leaves, going, God, why is this so difficult? If you want it to happen, why isn't it happening? And it really did happen very quickly, because by November, I was over here having an interview. And then by January,
You were here.
We were here. We sold our house, we sold our car, we offloaded all our possessions in the space of 2 months. And so it was a very, very quick process. And I remember the Bible verse, the Bible story that stuck out to me at that time was the one about Esther. Esther was in exile, and she was a bit reluctant about sharing her faith because it could have led to her death. And yet the words, for such time as this, for such a time as this, and they became my words. And for such a time as this, it all just seemed to happen so easily in the end. It was a few years earlier, I received a call to go to a place called Noosa, which was up the road from where I lived, about 2 hours. It was on a geographical area called the Sunshine Coast. Beautiful beaches, some of the best beaches in Australia. Really wonderful, lovely place, a place I would die to take a call to. And my wife was adamant that we would not take that call, because the school where my kids would be schooled was not up to par. And I really wanted to take that call. And it was my dream call. But it ended up being so difficult. We didn't go. But then a few years later, you'd think selling all your possessions, leaving everything behind, going to America should have been difficult. But it was the easiest call I've ever had and ever accepted. Yeah. And for me, that was a moment of grace. God knew I was in a dark place, and I was, I think, in a very dark place.
Can you describe, Pete, those dark places? So whether it was with your mom's death and you were finally grieving, or the frustration and dark place of this church that you had grown up and loved that just wasn't fulfilling you anymore. When you say you felt God's presence, can you describe it?
No. Yeah, it's a good question. How do I describe God's presence in those situations? It was just a certainty of a presence, it wasn't like I could see God physically, or it's not even like I could hear God. But I guess
did you feel something?
I felt protected, and I felt like I wasn't alone, and that I belonged. And with hindsight, you can just see that God was in all this, Right. And those experiences and a few others. I think now I don't need the hindsight, because I think with hindsight I can look back and go, yeah, God was present there, so therefore I know God is going to be present with me during this difficult day. Yeah. Okay. So it's those, like I said at the beginning, it's those eclectic experiences that build up over time to give you the reassurance that now that I'm older, I wish I could have had this surety when I was younger. Yeah. That's telling the story, right? So hopefully in me telling the story, someone else might be reassured that God is present with them.
You got it. I found that over and over. When we tell our stories, or I hear another person's story, I can relate, and I can see I can be challenged to look back on my similar experience and was God there? Oh yeah. And that feeling of warmth and of presence. And you're right, it is, I was challenging you a little bit because it's hard to describe, right? But when you feel it, you know it, and you know exactly what it is.
And so it's probably the Holy Spirit or something, one of my best mates back home, and I miss him terribly. We met through our wives. Our wives worked together in childcare at the time, and there was a few social functions that we were both dragged along to, and we ended up hanging out and becoming best mates. And every now and then we would go fishing for a weekend, and it really was not to catch fish; it was just to hang out. There were bonfire, talk, tell jokes, listen to music, whatever. Primitive camping. There was no bathrooms. There was no one. We'd get a little boat and we'd go off to one of the Bay Islands, and there was no running water, and there was nothing except us there. So that was cool, like a little sabbatical every couple of months.
Cool.
And he's not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination. And yet, in some of those moments, he'd ask questions about, well, what is the Christian faith about? Tell me a Bible story or things like that, And he doesn't always get it, because the Bible can be complicated, but the Bible can also be very easy. Stories of Jesus. My favorite story of Jesus is the woman at the well. And we've all heard sermons about the woman at the well, how she's immoral and she's had all these relationships and all the rest of it, And to me, that's missing the whole point. The whole point is this woman is excluded from her community, because why the hell else would she be gathering a well at noon in the hot sun? She's been rejected by her community, and yet Jesus meets her there, and he talks with her like an equal. She's an equal. He has a conversation. Who treats women as an equal back in those days, or in the Lutheran Church of Australia? Who treats women as an equal? And Jesus did. They had a conversation, and so her thirst was quenched. And so if I talk about the presence of grace, it's that feeling, I know God is with me in those dark moments. But in reality, I know grace because of Jesus, because he met with that woman at the well, who was an outsider, who was excluded, who experienced terrible pain and stuff. She experienced the darkness, and he was with her right in it, saying, drink up, I'll give you living water. I don't care how thirsty you are, I've got enough for you, and let's drink together, not as a patriarchal figure, not as a superior, but as an equal. And I love telling those sort of stories to Roy, that Jesus is just our brother, he's just our friend, and he's God's vehicle of letting us know that we're loved and we're embraced and that we're important. And when those dark moments come, that he's there with us.
That's the promise.
Yeah. And
So
that's my second favorite Bible story, is after his resurrection, the disciples are going, well, what do we do? We don't know what to do. Let's go fishing. And they had a terrible night, caught nothing at all, again, like they do. Like Roy and I never caught fish, But
you don't have one good fishing story?
But
okay.
come the morning, Jesus was there on the beach and he cooked fish for them. And they had a wonderful meal together. That's grace, that when nothing's working out, Jesus is there and he will provide. And not only will provide, but he'll enjoy the moment with us.
Oh, that's good. So what is your advice to those looking for grace in their lives? How do they become aware of grace in our lives?
I don't know. For me, like I say, it's been a lifetime of, I'm a slow learner. It's been a lifetime of experiences that help me to trust more in God's provision of grace in moments. But I don't know that people even need to go looking for grace. I think grace will find them. It always does. That's why we're not alone. That's why we're in community. That's why we are asked to go to the pub on a Wednesday night so that Jesus can use us as vehicles of grace. You know, in all the dark places, in all the edges. That's where Jesus wants us to be. That's where he was, in the real moments, in the real lives of real people. We didn't find him too much in the temple, you know, but maybe over a pint, that's where Jesus is.
Maybe.
I love it.
So just in today's Twitter economy, right? How would you describe or define grace in 144 characters?
In 144 characters, it says the reason why I am not on Twitter. Well, there's several reasons, but one of them is, gosh, that's so limiting and there's so much depth. So in 144 characters or less, grace is the presence of God in our lives that reassures us that we are loved, just as we are, no strings attached. We are loved by God and we're set free to love others.
It's beautiful.
That was 123.
It's probably a few more than that, but that's okay. You're forgiven.
Thank you. So graceful.
Thanks so much for listening today. And I hope you'll join us next month for another amazing story of grace. And as you walk in the company of grace this month, I pray you take the time and find grace between the lines.